the media has a powerful role in shaping public perception, but much of what is broadcast today is far from the full picture. Selective reporting fuels misperception by focusing heavily on dramatic, often violent incidents while ignoring the quieter stories of resilience, solutions, and community healing. Viewers are bombarded with images of smashed windows and burning cars, while the root causes of unrest and the everyday efforts to bring change are left off the screen. The result is a distorted reality where chaos appears to be the norm and fear becomes the dominant lens through which people view their own communities. This imbalance does more than just mislead, it erodes trust and feeds hopelessness. What many don't realize is that the lawlessness seen on the streets of Los Angeles isn't just a spontaneous eruption. It's the outcome of years of neglected leadership, poor policy decisions, and social systems that have failed their people. Leaders have made choices, whether through inaction or ideology, that allowed petty crimes to go unchecked and public safety to take a back seat. When enforcement becomes inconsistent and laws are selectively applied, a message is sent that consequences are optional. People see it, they feel it, and eventually some begin to act on it. The erosion of law and order doesn't start with the streets, it starts with the system. The current climate is one where bad behavior isn't just tolerated, it's quietly rewarded. With reduced penalties, zero bail releases, and an overwhelmed justice system, offenders know there's little to fear. Those who abide by the law suffer, while repeat offenders operate without concern. This imbalance creates a two-tiered society, one where accountability is seen as optional and victims are left behind. When consequences fade, deterrence disappears. Communities begin to unravel not because people are inherently bad, but because the structure that holds them accountable has crumbled. One of the most urgent yet least addressed aspects of the LA crisis is the role of mental illness and addiction. Streets crowded with tents and makeshift shelters are not just a homelessness issue, they are a symptom of deeper, unaddressed trauma. Many individuals in these conditions suffer from severe mental health disorders or substance dependencies. However, instead of providing long-term, clinically sound interventions, cities rely on surface-level solutions that fail to get to the root of the issue. These band-aid approaches give the appearance of action without creating meaningful change. The result is a growing population of people stuck in cycles of pain, poverty, and instability. While communities suffer, many politicians appear more concerned with managing narratives than resolving problems. Press conferences and symbolic gestures take the place of actual policy shifts and effective implementation. Leadership has become more about optics than outcomes. Instead of focusing on actionable steps that improve safety and restore dignity, energy is spent on maintaining political alliances and appeasing public relations concerns. The public is tired of rhetoric. They want results. But in the absence of genuine leadership, frustration and distrust continue to grow. Equally troubling is the way in which public dialogue is being managed and manipulated. Those who speak out about the real problems often find themselves suppressed, whether through social media algorithms, demonetization, or outright censorship. Conversations that could lead to awareness and change are labeled as dangerous or controversial. The gatekeepers of modern information aren't just failing to report the truth, they're actively filtering it, and in this environment, the voices of victims, concerned citizens, and whistleblowers struggle to be heard. This silence is not just unjust, it's dangerous. Despite all of this, there is still a reason to hope. Cities like Los Angeles are filled with people who care deeply and want to rebuild. Real change doesn't come from headlines, it comes from hard conversations, community organizing, and courageous decision-making. It means holding leaders accountable, restoring the value of consequences, and addressing root problems like addiction, education, and broken family structures. The road forward won't be easy, but it's necessary. If we have the courage to stop pretending and start facing the truth, we can restore not just LA, but the many cities across America facing the same silent storm. 2/2 lawlessness isn't something that simply appears out of nowhere or spreads like a natural disaster. It is the direct result of years of neglect, misguided policies, and a refusal to address root causes with real solutions. In cities like Los Angeles, what may seem like random chaos is actually a slow and systematic unraveling of law and order. Decisions made behind closed doors, whether driven by political convenience or ideological extremes, have allowed criminal behavior to grow unchecked. These aren't isolated incidents, but rather the symptoms of a system that has deprioritized safety, accountability, and structure in favor of optics and short-term appeasement. The policies in place have increasingly favored leniency over consequence. In theory, the push for reform was meant to bring justice and fairness to a broken system. In practice, however, it has often enabled repeat offenders to walk free with minimal or no penalty. The message this sends is dangerous, that actions no longer have meaningful consequences. Without deterrence, criminal behavior becomes emboldened. Petty crimes evolve into more serious offenses, and offenders begin to test the limits of a weakened system. When this happens repeatedly, public confidence in law enforcement erodes, and the social contract begins to fracture. At the same time, law enforcement officers find themselves in an impossible position. With fewer resources, less support from leadership, and increased public scrutiny, many are hesitant to intervene in situations that could escalate into controversy. This hesitation isn't born out of laziness or apathy, but from the constant fear that doing their job might cost them their career, or worse. In such an environment, proactive policing declines, response times increase, and communities feel increasingly abandoned. As trust breaks down, neighborhoods once considered safe become vulnerable, and families begin to feel the effects of a system in retreat. Meanwhile, the judicial and political systems fail to keep pace with the realities on the ground. Court backlogs, light sentencing, and revolving door policies contribute to a cycle where offenders are arrested and released in a matter of hours. Community members watch as crimes go unpunished and victims are left without justice. This breakdown in accountability fuels a perception that the rules only apply to those who choose to follow them. When people no longer believe in the fairness or effectiveness of the justice system, they begin to look for other ways to protect themselves, sometimes through vigilante behavior, sometimes through disengagement and despair. Compounding the issue is the lack of attention paid to prevention, instead of addressing the reasons why people turn to crime, such as poverty, lack of education, trauma, and mental illness. Policies often focus only on reaction. Even those well-meaning programs aimed at intervention are frequently underfunded or poorly managed, leading to minimal long-term impact. True prevention requires more than slogans and symbolic efforts. It requires investment in community infrastructure, mentorship, early education, and comprehensive mental health services. But until society is willing to make those investments, the cycle of lawlessness will continue to repeat. Adding to the problem is a cultural shift where certain kinds of criminal behavior are downplayed or excused for the sake of broader social narratives. In some circles, there is more concern about how the criminal is treated than how the victim has suffered. While compassion and reform are important, they must not come at the cost of public safety. Accountability is not cruelty. It is the foundation of a functioning society. Without it, even the most progressive ideals lose their credibility, and the social order begins to decay. When we prioritize ideology over safety, we risk losing both. In the end, lawlessness is not accidental. It is manufactured by a system that rewards inaction, excuses poor decisions, and ignores uncomfortable truths. It can only be reversed by facing these realities head on with policies rooted in balance, justice paired with compassion, enforcement coupled with prevention. The longer we deny the intentional roots of the chaos, the more difficult it will be to reclaim the streets, rebuild trust, and restore a sense of order that every citizen deserves. It will take leadership, courage, and commitment to truth, but it must begin now. When a society begins to reward bad behavior, even indirectly, it sets itself on a path toward instability and decay. In many urban areas, including Los Angeles, the criminal justice system has shifted in a way that minimizes consequences for repeat offenders. The initial goal behind some of these changes may have been blaming to correct historical injustices or reduce prison overpopulation, but the result has often been a softening of accountability. When individuals commit crimes and face little to no punishment, it sends a clear message to others: the rules no longer matter. Over time, this erodes the moral fabric of a community and creates a culture where wrongdoing is not only tolerated, but in some cases incentivized. The implementation of zero-bail policies has played a large role in this shift. Under these guidelines, individuals arrested for certain offenses are quickly released without having to pay bail, regardless of their criminal history. While designed to protect low-income individuals from being unfairly detained, the policy has unintentionally empowered serial offenders. People who would otherwise face detention are now able to cycle in and out of jail with little disruption to their routines. This revolving door approach makes a mockery of the justice system and leaves victims feeling unprotected and unheard. For those trying to live law-abiding lives, it creates an atmosphere of anxiety and frustration. The reduction or dismissal of charges for so-called minor crimes is another example of how the system rewards negative behavior. Crimes such as shoplifting, vandalism, and trespassing may be labeled as non-violent, but their cumulative impact is significant. Small businesses suffer losses they cannot afford, neighborhoods deteriorate, and the public's sense of safety diminishes. When prosecutors choose not to pursue these cases in the interest of reducing caseloads or appearing progressive, it sends the wrong message. People begin to believe that criminal acts are merely inconveniences, not serious breaches of public trust and order. In schools and public spaces, similar patterns are emerging. Students who act out violently or disruptively are often met with counseling instead of suspension, while workplace misconduct is brushed aside under the guise of second chances. While rehabilitation is essential, it must not replace responsibility. A system that prioritizes understanding over discipline alone creates an environment where bad behavior is not corrected but normalized. Those who follow the rules start to question why they should bother when others seemingly get away with everything. This imbalance breeds resentment and damages the sense of fairness that holds any group together. One of the most troubling consequences of rewarding bad behavior is the erosion of respect for authority. When citizens see criminals treated with leniency while victims struggle to receive justice, the lines between right and wrong begin to blur. Police officers, teachers, and even parents face growing challenges when trying to enforce rules as societal structures back away from support. Discipline is increasingly viewed as oppressive rather than necessary, and efforts to restore order are often met with resistance or ridicule. Without the reinforcement of consequences, authority becomes ineffective and disorder spreads. This breakdown doesn't only impact those directly involved. It radiates through entire communities. Neighbors stop reporting crimes, teachers give up trying to manage classrooms, and businesses shut their doors out of fear. Over time, a culture of apathy and acceptance of wrongdoing takes root. People become desensitized to criminal activity, seeing it as just another part of life in the city. What was once shocking becomes routine. And as public standards continue to fall, the effort required to restore them only grows more difficult. The longer this cycle continues, the deeper the damage becomes. Rebuilding trust in the system requires a firm and balanced approach. Compassion and second chances must exist, but not at the expense of safety and accountability. The goal should not be to punish harshly, but to correct effectively. Those who break the law should be held accountable in a manner that is firm, fair, and consistent. By reinforcing boundaries and reestablishing consequences, society can begin to reverse the damage done by policies that unintentionally reward bad behavior. Only then can communities feel secure again, knowing that rules mean something and justice is more than just a word. In the heart of many urban crises, particularly in cities like Los Angeles, lies an often ignored reality: the overwhelming presence of untreated mental illness and addiction. These are not fringe issues affecting a few isolated individuals. They are core drivers of homelessness, crime, and urban decay. Walk through certain neighborhoods and you'll find not just tents and trash, but people suffering visibly, some talking to themselves, others barely conscious. These are human beings in desperate need of help, not just shelter or food, but long-term, structured mental health care and substance recovery services. Yet the response to this crisis is too often reactive and superficial. Instead of facing these complex issues head-on, cities frequently resort to temporary fixes. Emergency shelters may offer beds for a night, but they rarely provide sustained treatment. Outreach workers hand out hygiene kits and sandwiches, but many of the people they serve require intensive psychiatric intervention or medical detoxification. The deeper needs go unmet, and the problems grow. Without access to inpatient care, medications, therapy, and support systems, individuals living with mental illness and addiction cannot stabilize their lives. They cycle through the streets, hospitals, and jails, trapped in a system that manages symptoms rather than solving causes. The connection between addiction and crime is well documented. Desperate to feed their habits or simply survive, many individuals turn to theft, vandalism, or prostitution, and yet these acts are frequently treated as criminal offenses rather than the consequences of a health crisis. This misunderstanding creates a vicious loop. Addiction leads to crime, crime leads to arrest, arrest leads to release without treatment, and the cycle continues. Jails become de facto treatment centers, unequipped and unqualified to provide actual care. The real need is for rehabilitation, not incarceration, but that requires long-term investment and political courage. Mental illness, similarly, is often visible and yet invisible. It's easy to dismiss a person yelling at the sky or sleeping on a sidewalk as a lost cause. But many of these individuals are suffering from conditions like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, PTSD, or severe depression. Left untreated, these illnesses impair judgment, impulse control, and the ability to seek help. They can also make people more vulnerable to violence or exploitation. Simply moving these individuals from one neighborhood to another or forcing them into short-term stays in shelters does nothing to address the underlying dysfunction that keeps them stuck in place. Families are often powerless in this situation. Laws designed to protect personal freedoms make it extremely difficult to intervene, even when someone is clearly a danger to themselves. Parents and siblings who see their loved ones deteriorate on the streets are left with few legal options. Meanwhile, the affected individuals are unable to advocate for themselves due to the very illnesses that impair their decision making. The result is a tragic stalemate. Loved ones watch helplessly, systems shrug responsibility, and the individual continues to decline. This is not compassion, it is systemic abandonment masquerading as freedom. The stigma surrounding mental illness and addiction also contributes to the lack of effective response. Society is quick to judge, slow to understand. People struggling with visible symptoms are labeled as lazy, dangerous, or beyond help. This leads to less public empathy and less political urgency to act. Funding for mental health services remains limited. Qualified professionals are in short supply, and comprehensive treatment centers are far too rare. Instead of focusing on building systems of care, city governments often prioritize aesthetics, clearing encampments for press coverage while ignoring the long-term needs of those displaced. Real change will only come when cities confront the full truth. That means acknowledging the scale of the mental health and addiction crisis, investing in long-term residential treatment programs, changing laws to allow earlier intervention, and dismantling the stigma that keeps these issues in the shadows. It means moving away from optics and toward outcomes. The streets of Los Angeles and cities like it will not improve until we treat mental illness and addiction not as moral failings or political liabilities, but as urgent public health emergencies deserving of compassion, structure, and sustained commitment. In many urban neighborhoods, fear has become the dominant emotion shaping everyday life. It influences how people move, where they go, and who they trust. Families avoid public parks after dark, shop owners close their businesses early, and children grow up conditioned to recognize the sound of sirens and gunshots. This isn't just about isolated incidents or temporary unrest. It's about the slow, grinding effect of fear when it becomes woven into the fabric of a community. When fear is constant, it begins to define a place, limiting opportunity, eroding morale, and replacing hope with caution. The source of this fear is not just the presence of crime, but the absence of consistent safety. People are not afraid simply because crimes occur. They are afraid because they feel vulnerable and unprotected. They no longer believe that help will arrive when it's needed or that justice will be served when it's due. This lack of confidence in law enforcement and the justice system creates a power vacuum. In that vacuum, fear thrives, and the loudest, most aggressive voices begin to dominate. Those who want to live peacefully are overshadowed by those who have learned to operate through intimidation or violence. This fear is particularly potent in areas where crime has become normalized. When shootings, robberies, or assaults are routine, people become desensitized. They stop reporting crimes because they don't believe it will change anything. They avoid eye contact with troublemakers, not out of apathy, but out of self-preservation. Over time, silence becomes a survival tactic. But that silence also allows the chaos to grow unchecked. Without community cooperation, even the most well-intentioned police officers struggle to build cases or prevent further violence. Fear silences witnesses, isolates neighbors, and strengthens criminals. Local businesses are also held hostage by this environment. Owners worry about theft, vandalism, and the safety of their employees. They install cameras and security gates, but these are only temporary solutions. Economic decline often follows prolonged fear. When customers stop coming and insurance premiums rise, small business owners either leave or shut down. What's left behind is a landscape of boarded-up shops, fewer jobs, and even fewer reasons for investment. The visual decline of a neighborhood only reinforces the sense of danger, creating a cycle that's difficult to break. Children growing up in fear-stricken communities face especially long-term consequences. Instead of playing freely or focusing on school, many are forced to navigate complex social dynamics to stay safe. Some are recruited into gangs for protection, while others learn to suppress their voices to avoid confrontation. Trauma becomes part of their developed mental landscape, affecting their emotional health, academic performance, and future opportunities. These children are not just innocent bystanders, they are the next generation, shaped by a world that has failed to protect them during their most formative years. The psychological toll on adults is just as serious. Constant exposure to danger can lead to chronic stress, anxiety, and feelings of helplessness. Parents worry not just about making ends meet, but about whether their children will return home safely. Elderly residents live in isolation, too afraid to enjoy the community they once helped build. In this environment, relationships suffer, civic participation drops, and faith in government fades. Communities fracture, not because the people want it to happen, but because the environment forces them into survival mode. To restore these communities, fear must be replaced with security and trust. This requires more than just increased policing. It requires consistent, visible commitment from local leaders, mental health professionals, educators, and residents themselves. Safety is a shared responsibility, but it must be modeled from the top down. It begins with enforcing laws fairly, protecting victims, and holding repeat offenders accountable. When people begin to see their environment improve, hope follows, and where there is hope, there is strength. Communities can rebuild, but not while they are held hostage by fear. It is only when fear is replaced by courage and justice that healing truly begins. In cities across the country, particularly in places like Los Angeles, political leaders often focus more on maintaining their image than addressing the root causes of urban decay. Speeches are made, press conferences are held, and slogans are printed on billboards, but behind the scenes, very little changes. The problems grow more severe while officials focus on managing optics rather than implementing real solutions. Instead of tackling crime, homelessness, and addiction with the urgency and honesty these crises demand, leaders often deflect, delay, or blame others. This political theater might win temporary approval from certain voter bases, but it does nothing to solve the problems affecting everyday people. Policy decisions are increasingly driven by public relations rather than evidence or need. When a scandal breaks or a tragedy occurs, the first concern is often how it will be perceived, not how to prevent it from happening again. Committees are formed, task forces are announced, and studies are commissioned, yet the findings are rarely implemented in a meaningful way. Instead of long-term planning, politicians offer temporary fixes designed to buy time until the next election cycle. This short-sightedness turns city governance into a performance, where the appearance of action is mistaken for actual progress. The result is that real issues are ignored or mishandled. Crime policies are softened to appear compassionate, even if it makes streets less safe. Homelessness is treated as a visual nuisance rather than a humanitarian crisis. Drug addiction is talked about in vague, sympathetic terms without any substantial investment in treatment infrastructure. Political leaders frequently avoid hard decisions because they fear backlash from activists, donors, or social media. But avoiding hard decisions doesn't make the problems disappear. It only ensures they grow larger and more complex with time. One of the most damaging political habits is passing the blame. City officials blame the state blames the federal government. Meanwhile, communities are left to suffer the consequences. Voters are told that nothing can be done without more funding, more legislation, or more studies. But funding often exists. It's simply mismanaged or spent inefficiently. Bureaucracy eats up resources that should go toward direct services. Even when money is allocated to help vulnerable populations, it is too often tied up in administrative costs, contractor deals, or programs that show little measurable success. Public trust deteriorates as people begin to see this pattern of avoidance and self-preservation. Citizens start to feel unheard, unrepresented, and expendable. The working class families, small business owners, and students who make up the core of the community grow cynical and disengaged. They witness campaign promises being broken year after year, and they stop believing in the possibility of change. When residents lose faith in leadership, civic participation declines, voter turnout drops, neighborhood organizations wither. The political detachment that sets in creates space for corruption, cronyism, and further incompetence to thrive unchecked. In contrast, real leadership requires risk and accountability. It means being willing to make unpopular decisions if they are in the best interest of the community. It involves investing in long-term solutions even when the results won't be visible before the next election. Real leaders must communicate honestly, accept responsibility for failures, and listen carefully to the people they serve. They must prioritize truth over popularity, progress over headlines, and service over status. Anything less than this is not leadership. It is political survival masquerading as governance. If cities like Los Angeles are to recover and rebuild, politicians must stop using their positions to preserve their careers and start using them to create change. That means stepping beyond party lines, resisting the urge to pander, and focusing relentlessly on results. It means cleaning up corruption, cutting through red tape, and funding programs that actually work. Until that shift happens, the cycle of dysfunction will continue. But if leadership rooted in courage, honesty, and action can take hold, the tide can turn. Problems can be solved, communities can heal, and cities can begin to thrive once again. In many urban areas today, there is a disturbing trend where the voices of victims are drowned out while offenders are given attention, excuses, and in some cases, even admiration. This reversal of empathy has real consequences, not just for those directly affected, but for the moral compass of society as a whole. Victims often endure trauma in silence. Navigating the emotional and psychological aftermath of crimes that are minimized or ignored by the very institutions meant to protect them. Their pain is dismissed, their stories are overlooked, and their need for justice is frequently lost in the noise of political narratives or media spin. The cultural shift in how offenders are portrayed plays a significant role in this imbalance. Instead of being held accountable, many criminals are described in terms that evoke sympathy or understanding, focusing on their backstory, environment, or struggles. While context matters, it should not eclipse the harm done to others. Too often, narratives center on what led someone to commit a crime rather than the suffering inflicted on the victim. This approach, though perhaps intended to be compassionate, can feel like betrayal to those who were hurt or violated. It sends a message that excuses outweigh consequences and that bad choices are more interesting than good people. Media outlets and social platforms frequently add fuel to this fire by sensationalizing offenders. Stories of their troubled upbringing or difficult circumstances take center stage, overshadowing the pain of those affected by their actions. Documentaries, interviews, and viral content sometimes romanticize criminals, turning them into misunderstood figures or tragic anti-heroes. Meanwhile, victims are left unnamed, their stories condensed into a few lines or omitted entirely. This imbalance in attention does not serve justice. It distorts it, creating a culture where wrongdoers are remembered and victims are forgotten. In the justice system itself, victims often find little closure or support. They are sometimes asked to relive traumatic experiences in court only to see light sentences handed down or charges dropped altogether. Repeat offenders may receive second, third, and fourth chances, while victims are left to rebuild their lives alone. Restitution is rare, and mental health support is even rarer. The emotional toll of not being believed, not being prioritized, or not seeing justice done adds another layer of suffering. For many victims, the system seems more invested in protecting the rights of the accused than upholding the dignity of those harmed. This imbalance is reinforced by certain policies that prioritize rehabilitation over accountability. While rehabilitation is a vital component of any humane justice system, it must not come at the cost of neglecting the victim. There is a difference between understanding the causes of criminal behavior and excusing its consequences. When systems become overly focused on offender rights without adequately supporting victims, they create an atmosphere of injustice. People lose faith in the fairness of laws and institutions. They begin to wonder if following the rules is worth it in a world where breaking them carries so few real consequences. Society needs to restore balance by recognizing the humanity of victims and ensuring their stories are heard and respected. Support services, legal protections, and public awareness must shift toward honoring those who suffer in silence. Victims deserve more than sympathy. They deserve tangible support, clear paths to justice, and assurance that their pain is not invisible. Communities should rally around victims with the same urgency and visibility that offenders receive when their names trend online or fill headlines. There should be dignity in healing and recognition in resilience. For true justice to exist, society must stop glorifying those who harm others and start prioritizing those who are harmed. Accountability must be restored, not out of vengeance, but out of respect for those whose lives were altered by violence, theft, or abuse. When victims are acknowledged, protected, and empowered, they can begin to heal, and so can the communities around them. It is time to shift the spotlight away from those who cause chaos and toward those who are forced to live through its aftermath. Only then can justice truly be just. The breakdown of family and education lies at the heart of many of the societal problems we witness today. These two institutions are supposed to provide structure, guidance, and values that help individuals grow into responsible, grounded members of society. When families are fragmented and schools are ineffective, the consequences ripple outward into communities, cities, and eventually the nation. Children who grow up without strong parental figures or consistent moral direction often struggle to form stable identities. They become more vulnerable to peer pressure, substance abuse, and even gang involvement, all because the foundational supports in their lives were missing or weak. A stable family environment does more than provide food and shelter. It teaches responsibility, discipline, empathy, and resilience. Parents and guardians are a child's first teachers, instilling lessons that shape behavior and world view. When that family unit is disrupted due to divorce, addiction, incarceration, or absenteeism, the child often lacks consistent guidance, emotional security suffers, and this instability can lead to long-term mental health challenges. Children in these environments may act out in school or disengage entirely, setting the stage for future academic failure and strained social relationships. At the same time, the educational system has shifted away from its core purpose. Schools once focused on equipping students with critical thinking skills, respect for authority, and preparation for adult life. Now, many schools are overwhelmed, underfunded, and burdened with administrative tasks that distract from real learning. Teachers are often stretched too thin, trying to manage not just academic instruction, but also the social and emotional development of students who are not receiving that support at home. As a result, discipline suffers, academic performance declines, and the educational environment becomes chaotic rather than constructive. The link between education and family is undeniable. A child who is supported at home is more likely to succeed in the classroom. Conversely, when that support is absent, schools are left to compensate, which they are often ill-equipped to do. Without parental involvement, homework is ignored, behavior problems go unaddressed, and the value of education is diminished. Many students begin to see school as irrelevant or adversarial. They drop out physically or mentally, and the consequences follow them into adulthood. Without a diploma or a trade, job prospects are limited, and the cycle of poverty and instability continues. In many communities, particularly those hit hardest by poverty, the breakdown of these institutions has become generational. Young parents raise children without having experienced a strong family or education structure themselves. This perpetuates dysfunction as each new generation inherits the trauma and disconnection of the last. In such environments, crime, drug use, and violence become normalized. The absence of consistent family and school support allows destructive behaviors to flourish, unchecked by the moral and academic boundaries that once served as guardrails. Efforts to fix these problems often focus on surface-level solutions, more funding, more technology, or stricter testing. But the root issues require deeper change. Families need resources and education to help them become stable and nurturing. Schools need the authority and support to enforce discipline and uphold academic standards. Community leaders need to recognize that no amount of policing or social programs can replace the foundational role that strong families and effective schools play in shaping the future of a society. Without restoring these institutions, long-term improvement is unlikely. To rebuild society from its core, we must restore respect and support for family and education. Parents must be empowered and held accountable for the role they play in their children's development. Schools must be returned to their purpose as centers of learning, discipline, and personal growth. When these two pillars are strong, they create a ripple effect of stability, success, and social health. But when they are weak or ignored, the consequences are felt everywhere, from the classroom to the courtroom to the streets. The future of our communities depends on our willingness to invest in these foundations and demand better from ourselves and each other. There is still hope for our communities, but it will not come easily. It requires a level of courage that many have forgotten exists within them. Hope does not emerge from political speeches or trending hashtags. It is born in the quiet, often unseen decisions that individuals make every day to stand up for what is right, even when it is unpopular or dangerous. Hope is not passive. It is active, resilient, and bold. It takes courage to believe in a better future when everything around you feels like it's falling apart. But history has shown time and again that when ordinary people find their voice and act with conviction, change becomes possible. Courage means refusing to accept dysfunction as normal. It means looking at a community that's plagued with violence, addiction, or poverty and saying, "This is not who we are." It means calling out corruption even when it's inconvenient. It means demanding accountability from leaders who have grown comfortable in their roles while the people they serve continue to struggle. It's easier to stay silent, to mind your own business, and to look the other way. But silence allows chaos to spread. Courage, on the other hand, disrupts it. Courage forces uncomfortable conversations, challenges weak leadership, and refuses to settle for anything less than progress. That courage must begin at the individual level. You don't need a title or a platform to make a difference. It starts in your home, in your neighborhood, in your child's school. It starts with being honest, with holding yourself and others to a higher standard. It's seen in parents who refuse to give up on their kids, teachers who go above and beyond for their students, and business owners who stay committed to their community even when the odds are stacked against them. These people may never make headlines, but they are the foundation of hope because they lead by example. Real change happens when that individual courage connects with others. When families come together to clean up a park, when neighbors organize to stop a local gang from recruiting kids, when volunteers show up day after day to help the homeless, it sends a powerful message that people still care, and that apathy does not have the final word. These acts of unity remind everyone that despite the fear and frustration, there are still people fighting for the heart and soul of their communities, and that fight matters. It shifts the culture. It creates momentum. Courage also involves sacrifice. You may lose friends when you speak uncomfortable truths. You may face criticism or even threats when you challenge the status quo, but that discomfort is the price of meaningful change. Great progress has always required people to risk something. We live in a time when too many people are afraid of being disliked, and too few are willing to be disliked for the right reasons. To stand for something real, you must be willing to face resistance. That resistance is proof that your voice matters, that your actions matter, and that you're no longer going along with the narrative simply because it's easier. And even in the face of all the chaos, the division, and the fear, hope can still grow if we're willing to feed it. It grows when we protect the innocent, when we tell the truth, when we take responsibility. It grows in the face of injustice when someone dares to say enough. Hope does not mean pretending everything is fine. It means seeing how bad things are and choosing to believe they can be better. That belief is not naive, it is revolutionary, because hope backed by courage is the one force that has always been able to turn the tide. So the question is not whether there is hope. The question is whether we will find the courage to act on it. Will we be the generation that lets fear win, or the one that finally stands up and says, "Not anymore"? The future of our families, our neighborhoods, and our cities depends on the answer. No politician, no policy, and no program can substitute for the power of people who refuse to quit. There is still hope, but only if we are brave enough to fight for it.